No CEO can do it all. No CEO is good at everything. And so even if you had the best preparation in the world, you're going to need the team to fill in for wherever your weak areas are. It used to be that we would say we were totally recession-proof because if companies aren't investing in a market, they're pulling people out, right? So that's what we used to always pride ourselves in, that we're in this great recession-proof business. But when you have a multi-location company, especially one with such a broad global footprint, it's really difficult to get them all functioning well. Right? It's like a game of whack-a-mole. You finally get that problem child right, and another one starts misbehaving.
I'd love to start with, you've been with the company 30 years now, like we were kind of laughing about before we got started. This is your 30-year overnight success story. I'm on my 40-year overnight success story. People think these things just happen overnight. They really don't. But I'm really curious, what was it like watching your dad grow this business before you formally joined the business?
Yeah, when people ask you about your childhood, it's always a strange question because we only have one, right? So there's nothing really to compare it to. But what I remember from being a young child when he was starting the business, first of all, it was unusual from the perspective that we were living in Japan because that's where he started the company to service the U.S. military shipments in and out of Japan. So I loved growing up in Japan. You know, it's a culture that embraces children. It's very welcoming, and I felt very well supported. As for my parents, starting a business is all consuming. So in a sense, he never stopped working. And sometimes he would work at home and we'd be, playing around him, and other times he'd be on long business trips. But I think from an early age, what it showed me is that there's no limits to how hard you can work. And Crown is a very different animal today than it was back in the 60s. But if you're going to start your own business, be prepared for some incredible hard work. At least that was the case with him.
Yeah, that must have been really interesting to watch. And I've started 8 companies from scratch myself, and the early ones, wow, 80, 100-hour weeks, sometimes years on end. So that hard work, but it never really felt like work for me. Did it feel like work for your dad, or was it a passion project?
Ooh, I think it was absolutely passion. We used to joke around that Crown was his favorite child. And yeah, I think he absolutely was a labor of love. Today he's 85. I think he's sort of done with working quite that hard, but I do think he enjoyed it and the challenge of it, because the other thing, now that you're asking me the question, that I really took away from watching him is that from an early stage, Crown was in multiple countries, and we expanded first throughout Asia and then to other continents. And when you have a multi-location company, especially one with such a broad global footprint, it's really difficult to get them all functioning well, right? It's like a game of whack-a-mole. You finally get that problem child right, and another one starts misbehaving. So I feel like he used to say to us, if I could only get them all working at the same time, right? And I think that's maybe a little bit less true today, but it's to some extent true, because sometimes the problem children will change due to macroeconomic factors or a different manager or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, COVID, all kinds of things that can take us off our game. I mentioned before we started recording that I watched the fireside chat with you and your father, and he would be such an interesting person to have a long conversation with. The experiential wisdom that came out and almost everything he said was incredible. I like the controlled risk piece of it when he was talking about that. How was that sort of permeated into operationalizing itself within your company?
Well, I think we go through chapters, right? And one thing I do remember from when I was very young and we were very much a startup is that my mother would get very stressed out at the degree of risk he was taking, right? Because it was sort of our money. and I think you have to take maybe less control risks in the beginning And then as you mature, then you have a little more at stake, and they're probably a lot more controlled. But so when I hear him speak about controlled risks, sometimes I smile because I think in the beginning they weren't quite as controlled, but thankfully we're still here to tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's normal for a startup company to be kind of on the edge for the first year, 2, 3 years, maybe going through. And then I do think, and he made the point that at least the way it landed on me, you don't want to bet the farm. So if you start winning, don't take big risks because now you think you know everything. Be really careful. And that was sort of the controlled risk message that I got out of it. It makes a lot of sense. But I do remember the first year, my first business, I think I almost went out of business 15 times. And
Yeah. I think that for our company, the period was even longer. And it wasn't because he was taking big risks, but he had to empower other people. And he was operating in some frontier locations that maybe had challenging labor laws, or it wasn't really a democracy. And so he had multiple cases where overnight they had to fold in, whether it be Iran during the revolution, or uh, if you have to close because the there's a lawsuit that you just can't sustain, right? So it wasn't just about him continuing to take big risks. When you're global, you just by definition are taking bigger risks because it's less in your control. You can't necessarily know everything about the legal framework in every market. And to some extent, we're still learning that.
yeah. Yeah, one of my companies, it was an aerospace aftermarket support business. So we repaired, overhauled parts for operators all over the world. We had 2,000 customers in about 60 countries. And thinking about this is a little bit of a sidebar, but the conversations around tariffs right now and what's going on there. My experience was in all of those countries, not one of them was an equitable, fair exchange of value. There were always extra barriers put in place, aside from just geographical location. Uh, so I've always thought it'd be really nice if we could level the playing field so it's an absolute fair exchange of value everywhere. Talk a little bit about that because this has to impact your business too.
Yeah, well, the one of the biggest businesses we have that it involves shipping goods across borders is our relocation business. And that is really moving people first and foremost. It started because we were a household goods mover, and it's expanded into things like immigration and real estate. And that sector, there are no duties if you do it right. If you screw it up, you're going to pay a ton of duty. But the way it's supposed to be done, it's not a dutiable item because it's used, it's not for resale. So the tariffs don't directly impact our business that much. The other B2B businesses we have, things like workspace, information management, they're either less reliant on shipping or they're primarily domestic. And so the tariffs, again, they don't directly impact the services we provide or the cost of the services we provide as much as they impact our clients' motivation to spend money. So many of our clients, it's not that they're impacted by tariffs so much, but we're seeing a huge degree of caution in spending money because of the uncertainty. They're not really sure what the future holds, if their own country will be impacted or it won't be impacted. So that's been challenging. So for example, if we were hired to fit out a major office complex or a new hotel development to store the goods that they need to deliver them as they needed them, we've seen a lot of those projects being put on hold. So it's wonderful that we won we were awarded the business, but we're on standby, and that impacts your revenue. So that's really, I would say, how the whole tariff landscape is affecting us.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And my optimistic view is I kind of like the chaos of it driving towards a more equitable playing field globally because I love doing business globally. I think there's just so much in that. I don't even think we're creating 10% of the value we could be creating in the United States if we focused on it. Think about it, the whole world gets in the game. So this will be interesting to watch over time. There's always pros and cons with everything, though, right?
No, absolutely. What we're trying very hard, and this is what we've done in other times where the market is put into some sort of chaos or there's a change, is we try to identify where the new opportunity is. So it could be that there's less activity into the US from abroad, or it could be, and we're already seeing this, like some kind of softening of the market, particularly in parts of Asia. But we just try to understand what's happening instead, and hopefully there is activity happening instead.
Yeah. Well, I've always thought of being global in a bunch of different markets as a way to keep us recession proof, because something could soften in one area, it's strong in another, and then intentionally keeping all of that balance so we can keep growing over time. Is that part of your strategy, thinking about it
Well,
that?
it used to be that we would say we were totally recession proof, because if companies aren't investing in a market, they're pulling people out, right? So that's what we used to always pride ourselves in, that we're in this great recession proof business. But when clients do less overall, that's not great for us. And there are other disruptions. It's not just geopolitical. It can be technology, where we don't need to move you to Paris because look, you can just work remotely. So that didn't used to be the case. We would need to take you to Paris to impart all your experience and knowledge. And so yeah, I'm talking strictly about our relocation business and our world mobility business right now. But and that change and those factors that have led to less business in that area has motivated us to focus on those more domestic businesses, like our workspace business, our information management business, and our fine art business, which there's just a larger domestic component. So I guess that's what companies that have the option of playing in the international playing field or the domestic one, they have that lever to pull. But it's not true for everyone. If you're a company and you're manufacturing your product in another country, then you have to pay attention to this or change where you're manufacturing. But that's new to us.
Yeah, and I've heard you talk in other interviews around having a culture of innovation and having encouraging all the team members to come up with ideas for new business lines, brands, things that we can do. That has to help a lot. So talk about that and how you drive the innovation and get them in the game. And I mean, I've always wanted all of my team members, and I still do today, to act like the CEO of their own role and run a little business within a business. What are you doing there? It sounds like you have something very similar.
Yeah, so the first thing is that the whole impetus for us to pivot was rooted in the fact that our largest business used to be that relocation business I was talking about. Today, it's already not our largest business. Our information management business is larger. However, we know that we need to still expand into other areas to compensate for the fact that that still large business has gotten smaller. And it just so happens that innovation and new ideas is one of my favorite things anyway. I think that creative solutions to customer problems is nothing more interesting or rewarding than that. So what we did is we've done things in the past. For example, one of our 5 corporate values, we call it open-minded, and it really is about innovating and finding better ways to do things for customers and for ourselves. So annually, we've given it an award globally for each of our values, and open-minded has been one of them. However, in 2025, this is our 60th anniversary as a company, and because my father was known as a pioneer, and he's a wonderful creative thinker, and he quickly identifies opportunities that suit us and suit the market. It's kind of a superpower of his. We thought, what if we celebrate our original pioneer, which was him, and create something that, a few initiatives that will really put the spotlight on our need to pivot from our heritage business to something new that we're well equipped to do. And so we came up with a few things. We started out the year by introducing something that we called Innovation Fridays. It doesn't have to be on a Friday, but it was 2 hours where teams were given to just get together and brainstorm. They could do it independently, but we really encourage kind of cross-team collaboration because that diversity in thinking really helps. And I think people just liked the idea of being able to being given permission to shift gears. By Friday, you're tired. And because some of our offices are hybrid, we do kind of encourage people to do it when they're together. So it may not be Friday, but so that was one thing. And then one that we're really excited about is in honor of our aforementioned founder, we did something called the Crown Pioneer Challenge. And it was a little bit like Shark Tank, or abroad they call it Dragon's Den, that TV show where people come and pitch ideas. And so the first thing that we did is we handpicked a group of mid to senior level managers to be our dragons or Shark Tank. And we gave them the brief. We told them, what we're looking for is an external proposition, not a way to do our business better internally, but something we could bring to market. And these people that were the panel of judges, they did not disappoint. They came from all different parts of the company, from IT to different business units. Some people were in technology. They really scrutinized the entries very thoroughly. And I don't know how it happened, but we got a lot of entries into it. And so they had to make the difficult decision of who were the finalists. And then we had our executive leadership team and our executive board be the final judges of those 5 entries. And I think I don't know why it was so taken up, but I think maybe it was the opportunity to get visibility to the most senior people at the company. It gave a lot of credibility to the contest, and there was a little bit of prize money, but not so much that you could retire from it. And I think it was also just the pride in knowing that if I win, the company's really going to do this because we made that commitment at the outset. And so we just actually completed the process and we voted, and it's very transparent what the scores were. And we had feedback sessions with each of the teams. And, we have 3 winners that are going to now have proofs of concept one in India, one in New Zealand, and one in Mexico. So, very, very great. It was funny. There's one office that told me after watching the video recording of the awards and the description of the top 3 winners, they, for the first time, went off and did their Innovation Fridays because they were so inspired by what had the ideas that the teams had come up with. So, I think that what we need to do is really prove to our employees that 1, we value it. And we did that by having all these senior people involved. And 2, that something's actually going to come of it. And 3, you have permission to think out of the box, right? We've been open about it's not, the most important thing is not whether this idea works. It's that you put rigor behind it. You did research, you have a business case for it, and you can speak to it. You can argue it to senior people. So I think that just created an environment where people were comfortable thinking differently.
Yeah. Well, if I worked for you and this was going on, I would feel like I really matter and I'm actually in the game. I can move the needle and make a difference. And so all of that has to drive so much more productive engagement. Productive to me is, creating the value you hired them to create, and they're like leaning in to fully do it. What are you noticing there around culture and just productive engagement across so many different, countries, diversity, employees, and all of that?
I don't really have the answer. I'm humbled by it. Quite frankly, this is a kind of great idea initiative that could have also fallen flat where people were just too busy or they didn't care enough. And I was shocked. I was shocked with the number of entries. I was shocked by this panel of judges we handpicked that I described. I mean, those people did themselves a service by doing such a good job because now they're all on our radar and we see what leadership they brought to it. And then watching, maybe, I have 3 kids and maybe this is the mother in me, but watching these people present their ideas, I'm so proud of them. They all did really great. And there's also a whole bunch of ideas that were not in the final 3. So what we've committed to doing is going back to those ideas and reviewing them again. And it could be that some of them are really suitable for specific markets, even though they didn't make the cut on the best ideas for us to scale. So yeah, we've committed to doing that. And I think people appreciate that we're kind of giving them credit for the work that they've done. And it matters to us. We have quarterly business updates like a lot of companies where all our managers join, and we've talked about it in those sessions, and we've made these commitments out loud. So now we really have to honor them, right? So I think that probably helped, because one thing I noticed with the 3 winners is that the team was the presenting team, but their manager and their manager's manager was as excited as the team about winning this thing or being one of the top 3. And first of all, that's great to see. We've got managers that really care about the success of their part of the organization. But second, it just allowed all of us to see the supportive, mentoring side of these people as managers. So yeah, all around, I could talk about it all day, but it's been really good. Of course, now is the hard part, right? We've got this far. Now we really have to do it, because if we don't, then this whole competition will never be able to do it again, because it won't have any credibility. So we put in some framework and accountability already, and it will be incorporated into our budget, which our budget season starts in September. And yeah, the idea is we're going to do this at latest at the beginning of 2026.
Yeah. Now, any one of these 3 could be another brand, another entire business line if it takes off, right?
Yeah.
Well, what a
Yeah.
way to grow.
Absolutely. I mean, if you talk to global marketing, they would be like, wait. No new logos. Wait a minute. But definitely down the track, that's possible in any of these areas, or it could fit very nicely within one of our brands, which all of them did. And that's one of the reasons that they won, is that, the cost of entry wasn't prohibitive. It applied to enough businesses around the world, so it was scalable. It aligned with our strategy. And that was the other thing that kind of floored me, is that every year in the last couple of years, we've done a lot of work to articulate our priorities for the year. So we usually pick just sort of 5 or 6 things, and we try to articulate them very specifically for the year. But the other thing that happened this year is we started for the first time talking about a 5-year strategy. It's just not how we've thought before. We've always thought about the next year or 2. And so we've started to talk about the elements of our 5-year strategy and what's important within that. And I didn't know how this happened. Well, I kind of have an idea, but these teams, they very clearly aligned their projects to the elements of that strategy. And I think what happened is, and I didn't know this was happening, is those managers who had access to our global business updates, they would take the information and really effectively cascade it, which we do ask them to do, but they cascaded it very well, because I was listening to these presentations thinking, how the heck do these people know all this? But it was good because their ideas fit.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've always thought of innovation as like any incremental improvement or a better way than the previous day. So any incremental improvement, it can be micro innovation to significant. I think a lot of folks, when you hear innovation, they think it has to be the next iPhone. It's like, I don't think that at all. I mean, what I'm getting from you is you've really leaned into leveraging the entire team, all of your thousands of employees. There's not a lot of companies that are great at doing that. How do you define innovation for your team, if they, or do they even ask?
Well, I think it's an important point you make, because when we started turning up on the volume on the need to diversify, because we saw really our heritage business declining, we were talking about innovation, diversification, and some managers got a bit worried because they were afraid that somebody would want to do crown iPhone, mobile phones or some crazy diversification. And so we tried to be a little bit better about explaining what we defined as a good innovation, appropriate innovation. And that included things like, what do we already know how to do? Is it just a different customer segment that needs this in just a slightly different way? Or is it something that one of our established customer segment needs, but we don't provide? And so we tried to give some direction. There were some ideas in the Pioneer Challenge that were a little more aggressive innovations that required a lot more capital, more than we were prepared to invest, right? So it's not to say that every single one was perfect, but I think people understand this, and the case they were making, these top ones, was that we can actually do this with the resources, largely with the resources we have. So we did have to fine tune how we were articulating things like innovation and diversification.
And is there an example or two you can share of a business line or brand that you had to walk away from in some way?
There was one that required significant investment in a new technology. And as significant as it was, the executive board and leadership team felt that it was understated. They were underestimating. It was already a huge number, but they were underestimating the amount of money it was going to cost and the amount of time it would take. And so that was a tech-centered solution. Cool idea, but first of all, our aspirations are to be tech-driven, but not technology-based, right? We don't want to be a tech company, and that's an example of one we said, yeah, maybe that's not the best fit for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like your purpose statement to make it simpler to live, work, and do business anywhere. So, in all the research that I did getting ready for this, like, you really help the world move and transition more smoothly. Like, it's such a cool thing that you're doing globally. How did you come up with the purpose and kind of walk through that? Is this something recent, or has this been a purpose for a long time?
I think that purpose statement of making it simpler to do business, live, work, and do business anywhere in the world is probably about 5 years old. And we looked at our different business lines and thought, what do they have in common, right? They're all about helping you either get to a place, get set up in a place, get necessary resources to a place, maybe storing them, maybe asset managing them. And because we're a service business, of course, we need to help make it digestible, simpler for the customer, because actually it's really complicated what we do. Crossing borders, getting materials either into tricky districts of a city or in a country, it's so technical. And I see new hires and they think, oh, how difficult can this be? And the first time they talk to a customer, they get a list of 10 questions they don't answer because they don't know the answer to, because it's so technical and it's so specific to what a client needs to do, that it's not that our business is simpler, but we do want to make it simpler for our customers. That was the idea behind it. How do we bring our suite of, especially B2B businesses, together in a coherent way? And how do we convey our desire to make it manageable for a customer, even though it is absolutely complicated?
Mm. Do you primarily deal with businesses, managing employees and all the stuff they do? Do you have individual families that'll come to you, say, I need help moving, to this other country?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we have retirees, or we have people that are moving for personal reasons. But the vast majority of people that we relocate, either domestically or internationally, and most of our work is international, they're moving for work. It's just that there's a trend now as companies try to reduce their own overhead. Our clients try to reduce their own overhead, that they don't necessarily want to manage all that. They'll just say, okay, here's $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 that you can spend to get yourself to India. And so that's where we come in. So we may be contacted by Mr. or Mrs. Smith, but they're moving for their work. And what's actually, this is sort of a tangent, but what's really interesting is we get to see the shifts in the traffic patterns. And so while overall that business is down, it is so interesting to see what happens in the world. So even amidst all this kind of tariff discussion, which is putting pressure on the sector, we're for the first time seeing groups of mainland Chinese that need help getting visas in a city in Latin America or another city in Asia. And in the past, maybe that wouldn't have been the pattern, but with today's environment, that's maybe where the growth opportunity is that wasn't yesterday. So I love that aspect of the business. And we also get to see where are the hospitality or commercial office developments coming. And that's a clue on, where do our clients see the opportunity to grow.
How cool to sit where you're at Crown to be able to see these rivers of people and stuff flowing all over the world and changing based on kinds of geopolitical issues, tariffs, whatever. What a cool insight. And then being able to leverage that to find the next products or services or where to drive your existing businesses, right?
Yeah, and the markets are very different to each other. So the person who's running our UK operation will have seen much more development maturity. So for example, that I was giving you the example of that Pioneer Challenge idea that was very tech-centric, and we thought we didn't necessarily want to make that level of investment in something that would probably take a long time to build. It was for a less mature market, right? That team that pitched it was in a less mature market, but then the person sitting in the UK or the US, they would have already seen that. It's a market-specific product, but there's a real value in that because it's hard to understand what it's like outside of your own environment, but we have our management team is scattered everywhere. So they have that visibility. And so these poor presenters, like they thought they knew, but there's people in the audience that maybe they'd seen that before somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm really interested in operationalizing things like culture. I mean, you mentioned it before. An idea is one thing, but you have to do the work. And so the idea could be 3% of it, but 97% is doing the work. At least that's how I look at it. So operationalizing culture and the alignment tools that go through that. So once you develop that purpose, let's say around 5 years ago, how did you operationalize that? And did you see any difference in the results of the business by having that and how it aligned your team members?
Yeah, the purpose statement, it's kind of the umbrella of it all. But within that, we have what I mentioned before, our values. We have other elements like the way we want to operate. And I would say we operationalize those a bit more. So in our performance management framework, where the vast majority of our employees, unless they're, driving a truck or sitting, in a warehouse full time, most of our employees, all of our office-based employees have to go through the same performance management process. And that's how, the decisions around compensation, bonus are all determined. And there are elements of that tie directly to our values, and we call them our characteristics. And that's one way not only to repeat what the desired behavior is, but it's tied to how they're compensated. So that's one example. The other one is one you referred to, where we have awards tied to them. And when we give the awards, again, they're from, the board presents them by video to everybody. And we talk about, again, the value and what it means. And then the winner, we say what they did that tied to that value. And so it brings to life, not only does that individual get some compensation for winning the award, but, and the other cool thing is that they can pick just money, or they can pick a trip to a Crown location somewhere in the world where they get to work in that office for a few days, visit the location. And so it's a wonderful prize, and everybody definitely pays attention to who wins this. But we talk about, it's a chance to talk about what it is we are hoping they'll do and what we want our company to be. So that's another example. And then I would say in our strategy development, we have a team of we have a strategy director and a head of strategy, and they try to incorporate that into all our strategy framework as well. So it's like a repeated thing, and it allows us to be more consistent. I don't know beyond that. I can't off the top of my head. There probably are other examples, but we do try to build it into whatever we do.
Yeah. Yeah. You really do seem to make it about the team and working with them, developing them, way more than making it about yourself. And that's what I got from your father in the interview as well. I think that's amazing leadership to do that. It may seem like breathing to you and second nature, but the fact that you're just constantly leaning in to leverage and help the team that you have, all 3,000-4,000 of them. Was that easy for you to adopt that leadership style? Was it watching your father, or was it just like breathing for you?
I need these people. I can't do this by myself. It's not about, oh, if I do this, it will motivate people. Like, there's a tremendous experience on the leadership team in a variety of disciplines. And the respect is genuine. And then even beyond the leadership team, my favorite thing is to see someone do something amazing, right? It doesn't matter if there's someone in the home, someone helping a customer, maybe especially that. In fact, when I travel, it's not always possible, but my favorite thing is to go to a client site and see what they're doing. And it's the most inspiring thing possible. And these are not necessarily the most senior people at the company, right? They're just people who care about the work. And I love that. So to answer your question, it's not about modesty. It's just realism. You can't do this alone. Any CEO that thinks it's about me, I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of CEOs who do make it more about themselves and their team, and that de-energizes the teams across the board. So the biggest of the companies that I built had a little over 500 team members when I sold it in 2016. And I actually talked to them for about 7 months in all hands meetings, which I do every month, about the possibility of doing it. And if a large enough percentage of them didn't want to do it, I wouldn't have done it. Took millions of dollars off this well into 9 figures sale and put it out as a retention bonus. Like, all I think about is the team. Like, we all got here together. So I'm 100% with you. And everything we do, we're on this journey together. At least that's the way I think about it. Developmental journey, learning from each other. It sounds like we're kind of in alignment there.
Yeah, it is a balance though, right? Because we're all predisposed, I think, one way or the other. You're either collaborative or maybe, I don't know what the right word is, but say directive, or probably somewhere in the middle. And that is and continues to be a growth area for me personally, because I love collaboration so much that the downside of that is that you also need to make the decision, right? So when after maybe 9 months of having the CEO role, I actually I asked HR to do a 360 of me. And I got some feedback that said, sometimes I'm not clear what the decision is. And I thought, okay, well, that's not going to work. So my point being that collaboration is fantastic. It's energizing, it's inspiring, and you get a lot of good ideas, but you also have to make decisions, including the tough ones. And so that's an area that I've really worked hard to be a bit more decisive. And, people are grateful for that clarity as well.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the leadership traits that I've adopted for decades now is edge. You have to be able to make the tough calls when you get the information, move fast. Sometimes team members have to go, don't let it linger too long. And that's a challenge, for a lot of folks. In the lead up to you becoming CEO, share a couple of, if you can, big lessons along the way to get you ready for this role. I've heard you talk in other interviews about, having a little bit of, hey, it's kind of normal imposter syndrome. Do I know what I'm doing here? Should I be doing this? I can tell in this conversation, yes, you should be doing it. And I bet you're amazing at it, which you are. What are some big lessons to kind of get you ready for that over that 30-year journey to this point?
Yeah. Wow, that's a really hard question. I think you learn much more from the tough times, right? So you know what energizes you, and I think that's important to know. If you're energized by seeing people do great work, know that, so that when you need to lift yourself up because you're pulling long hours and you're exhausted, like, know that. So that's one thing I learned, is that you will have times that you're wiped out. You think, I need a break, but then remember those parts that you love the most, and that will help lift you up. But going back to that earlier comment about learning more from the tough times, we had a period during the pandemic where we made a decision to divest a huge piece of our business here in the US. And at the time, that was my patch, was the Americas. And the pandemic was already tough for us personally, right? We were at home and there was all sorts of maybe fear or uncertainty. But then layer on top of that I had to divest a big piece of our business, which, if it was just the business, no big deal, but it was also people's lives. And they were also people going through the pandemic. So brutal, brutal period. And I had to do it. And so you do what you have to do, but you come out of it just a little bit stronger, and understanding that even when you do tough things, you can do them in a compassionate way. And so much is about communicating, so that people don't invent their own version of whatever the tough change is. And so I would say that, unfortunately, prepared me very well with the challenges that might come up with being a CEO. The other thing that I learned, and this is not something I did, but our head of risk, he took it upon himself to do weekly kind of stand-up meetings where anyone who wanted to, that was in the right time zone, could join. And he had data about the number of service initiations that we were seeing, because of course it dropped, and so we could watch the trend. He had collated information about changes to shipping rules, things that affected our business, a little bit of news synopsis. And it just showed me, like, even in really rough times, if you step up, maybe it's in an area of your particular interest, and pull people together. I mean, it was kind of like, did you watch Cuomo's press conferences during the pandemic at all? Andrew Cuomo, New York. Yeah, I think actually the whole world was watching those, bizarrely, but it had the same effect that those press conferences did. Like, you just wanted a place to go where you could get an update, where you could see maybe other people that had similar concerns. And so I took away from that how important it is to communicate, especially maybe in those tough times.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always done the monthly all hands meetings, and they're usually an hour long, and it'll be by functional group or a few functions together. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes talking about the business, where we're going, how we're going to get there, important things to the team, and then they get to share the best work that they're doing to create value for the organization. What I loved about it is there was never the rumor mill couldn't go longer than 30 days. Because we did this like clockwork every single month. And one day I set aside, we're going to get to all 500 team members today. And it was one of my favorite days of the month. And especially when things got really hard, like we're going to go through this. I was in the aviation, repair and maintenance business. Think about after 9/11, when all the aircraft were grounded, fewer people were flying. Most of our competition, significantly took a step back or went out of business. And so I brought the entire team, and I said, this is going to be a challenge, but if we work together on it, I bet we get through it successfully. If not, if we keep it in a silo with senior leadership, it's going to be a problem. And I even went so far as to say, if we don't figure it out, up to half of us could lose our jobs. And we didn't have to lay anybody off. We all worked together. We figured it out. And I think that's the best way to be with everybody. I think that's what they that's what they want. They want to be in the game. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, delivering hard news to all of the team members in a productive way.
I mean, I think it starts with honesty, right? Because it's an emotional process. The just being transparent, and so that if you get tough questions, you don't have to cover up anything. So I would say start with the truth. And there were many cases of people who, because of the divestiture we were making, we knew that they didn't have a job for long, but we made it so that it was worth their while to help us through the transition. So that there were a lot of roles like that. And then the other thing we did is that we worked very, very hard to make sure that as many people as possible had roles at the company taking over that part of the business. So I think that even for people who maybe they didn't fit that category, seeing that we were doing our best, it counted for something, because it's your reputation, how you handle these transitions. I mean, it's wonderful to hear that in your business you didn't have to lay anyone off, but we did. And first we had to furlough people, and then we could bring some back, but not others. And then we did a divestiture. So it was all very complicated, but we just tried to do almost like what we'd want, treat other people the way we'd want to be treated, be truthful, and just be as respectful as possible and as fair as possible. So those were the things we did.
Yeah, that really goes a long ways. Yeah, by including everybody in the conversation, just a short story on how we got through that time I mentioned after 9/11. A lot of our clients that were flying employees out to oil rigs, and that was backing off. A lot of the people movers backing off. So they had large maintenance departments. We just went in and said, let us take that over for you, since you don't today want to carry that overhead. We actually grew through that time because of that idea.
Wow.
And so I'm kind of a believer in there's always a better way that we can think of, and it's our job to find it to get through any scenario. Because even, in my case at that time with aerospace, you could cut the entire industry more than in half and we're still a grain of sand. When I sold it, we were about $100 million in sales. Still a grain of sand on a beach in this giant industry. So there's always a way to grow no matter what's going on. But are we creative enough to leverage what we have today to be able to get there? And I just think there is a better way. And it's our job to find it. How do you feel about that? Does that make sense?
Well, first of all, I love what you said about, when you're just one player in a market, there's always a place to grow, so I think that's a really good mindset. This doesn't necessarily answer your question, but one added thing I would say about when you have to navigate tough waters is that the people are staying long term, you have to show them every bit as much attention in making sure they understand the plan, the strategy, the story, as the people you're trying to take care of because you're saying goodbye. Because I think, again, people, if there isn't information, they have to make it up. And you don't want to lose people that you weren't intending to separate, right? So that's true in many, many areas, including the things we talked about, purpose, values. But one area of strategic importance in one of our businesses is sustainability, because our workspace services business, the clients are under a lot of pressure to reduce their carbon footprint because they're running big office towers and it consumes huge amounts of energy, and maybe they have a fleet. And so by demonstrating to them, this is how we are repurposing furniture or reducing emissions or, whatever the action is, it helps those clients, but it really helps the employees too. So really my point is about making sure that you are telling the employees that you want to stay all the good things too, because in this environment, people could leave for the next opportunity if you don't get them invested.
Yeah, if they don't feel safe, I can see them taking off. But also, aren't they collectively creating the value that we're trying to drive forward here and lead? And So the less they know about it, it's almost like asking them to hit a bullseye. They can't even see the target. It makes no sense. So I think we should always be doubling down on doing that. Uh, Talk a little bit about, we're starting to this loving this conversation. We're starting to run up on time. Talk a little bit about the Crown Foundation and the work that you're doing there.
So the Crown Foundation is just one specific part of what we are calling our ESG strategy, which is environment, social governance. And the Crown Foundation is predominantly the social part, all the charitable work. It was a way for us to spend money tax free, to donate to some of these charities. But really, it's so much broader than that for a company like ours. Governance is a huge topic. Things like data security, anti-bribery, and corruption. They're huge issues, particularly in specific markets. And by trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing, we're vetting a supply chain that's doing the right thing, that reduces risk for us, but it also makes a big difference to certain customers. And then on the environment side, we're property owners. We run big warehouses. We have fleets of trucks. We consume a huge amount of electricity in offices as well. And so we're really taking seriously our commitment to reducing those emissions, because if left to people's own devices, they'll just be wasteful, right? So it's unnecessary. And so we've really gone through a pretty steep education process. Something like almost 80% of our employees have taken carbon literacy training now. I did one this year that was kind of a different level, called carbon literacy training. And it was tremendous. It allows me to speak with a lot more passion and authority on the reasons for what we're trying to do. And so I think, it's got many components in that. It helps our employees feel proud that the work they're doing is not harmful, but it's an area to grow, because most of us, we're not experts in the field. We have a sustainability director. She's an expert, but she's helping us to craft an environment where we can all become better educated. And I think that our employees appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Uh, to me, energy drives progress, and the more efficient we can be with it everywhere, it's just going to accelerate the progress based on the energy we have. And I thought for a long time that pollution is one of the biggest problems we have on the planet. Even my aerospace business at one point, as far as I knew, we had the largest captive electroplating shop in Arizona, and we could do giant landing gear parts, going through it. And I designed it from day one to be zero sanitary sewer discharge, like nothing left. And we had triple containment in the rooms, and we would have material that we could recycle every single month. And the regulators couldn't believe it. They'd even sample our air leaving the building and laugh and say the air leaving the building is cleaner than the air coming in.
No.
So I think one of the biggest issues we have is around just general pollution on the planet. And so any organization that's doing anything to make an impact there, I salute you. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, well, it's one thing that's been really interesting is to see that the emission factors in different countries are different. So the way they generate electricity is either much more polluting or much less polluting. And what that's allowed us to do, because I referenced our property portfolio is probably the most valuable thing about Crown at this point. So we're trying to do anything that helps to preserve and grow that. And so it allows us to prioritize in which countries and on which network of facilities would we make the biggest difference by investing in, for example, solar panels, or, if water is a bigger issue in another place, rainwater collection. So that's been, I think, really interesting, that it is one size doesn't fit all. Not every country is doing things in the same way, and we can try to increase our impact by understanding that.
Yeah, that's great. And just to put it in perspective, your property holdings are around $1.5 billion, right?
Yeah, there's a little less than that, but today, and then we set ourselves some good targets for the next 5 years.
And that's over 250 locations?
Facilities, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Facilities, yeah. And can you share any of the targets over the next 5 years you just mentioned? Or?
Our target is to grow that by another 50 million. in the next by 2030.
Yeah, that's amazing. My biggest takeaway in this conversation is just how intentional you are about leveraging all the team members across the organizations, the 5, 6, 7 different brands that you have. That's impressive. Thank you. Any any final words of wisdom or anything you'd like to share with our listeners here based on your experience? And again, we could probably go 3 days in this conversation.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, you make a big deal about valuing the team you're on, but I guess I would question for any leader where that's not their natural inclination. I would encourage them just to do as much listening as possible and observing, because not only might that help them to fully appreciate and hopefully motivate their team, but it's also really interesting. You learn a ton from it. Right. That's kind of why I like to go to client sites and sort of see what people are doing, because I learn the most from our clients and from the people who are serving them more than anyone else in my work. So, yeah, if that helps people who they think, oh, how does someone think that way? Just listen and watch, and it will be easy.
Yeah, my experience is that being the way you're talking about actually will make them more money than just focusing on the money, because the team is really creating all of that value. And I do have one more question, and I don't know how quickly you can answer this. In most family, startup or run businesses where you have a transition of a family member, most of the time it doesn't work very well, and I think it's because they're really not getting them ready for that, and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. What's your advice there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's a bit of a balance is that I don't think you're doing your offspring any favors by saying you are the preordained one, right? Because then what's the motivation to work hard? And that was certainly the case for me. There was never a conversation about you will be the CEO one day. It just wasn't. And it's not really I don't think it would have really motivated me. It probably would have just terrified me. But so from that perspective, if you're going to just hold that next generation accountable for doing good work, you're probably not perfectly preparing them for the role. And certainly when, unfortunately, our former CEO, which not my father, but somebody who was an interim CEO in between us, not interim, but he was CEO between, when he passed away, I felt totally like I'm not ready. I can't do this job. But that's where I guess the rest of the team comes in, is that you can do it if you're on a strong team, right? And you just have to be patient with yourself and allow yourself to grow in the areas that maybe you don't have experience, and trust others within reason, right? To fill those gaps, because no CEO can do it all. No CEO is good at everything. And so even if you had the best preparation in the world, you're going to need the team to fill in for wherever your weak areas are. So yeah, I think the transition, it probably is great that there was someone who was CEO for many years in between my father and I, because then it's not a direct comparison, right? So that for sure was helpful. And yeah, let's see. It's still new. Let's see if the transition works well or not. But I also grateful for a great relationship with my father. That's meant the world. But that we've earned each other's trust and love over 57 years of my life. So that's a very helpful thing. But it, again, like you said, the 30-year overnight success. This was a
Yeah, so preparation is super important, and it's not just am I going to do it the same or as good. It's about doing it different in a better way. Grow the legacy generationally.
Yeah, I think the change is good, right? And the way I'm approaching it, I'm sure there are huge weaknesses compared to the way somebody else would approach it, but it's the way I believe, and I think it's good for us today. And I think it's probably good when someone's not CEO for 50 years because then you get that fresh thinking and new approach. So yeah, it's early days for me, but it's pretty exciting so far.
All right. Well, it is absolutely working. So, Jennifer, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate this.
Mhm. Yeah, lovely to talk to you.
Okay. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and subscribe. And until next time, leave your comments and show your value to the world.